Hey everyone, this is Pete, and welcome back to Atari A to Z Flashback, a series of explorations of the 150 games that make up Atari Flashback Classics for Nintendo Switch. Today's game is Super Challenge Football. This was a 1982 release for Atari 2600, published through Mattel's M Network. And like most of M Network's releases, this is a port of an Intellivision title. In this case, it's a port of the 1979 release NFL Football. And like the Intellivision's Major League Baseball that we looked at last time, this game had no real team names or player names despite having the NFL license, so again the license was dropped for subsequent re-releases. The Intellivision version was regarded as an excellent football game at the time of its original release for its wide variety of available plays and where you could program each member of your team separately rather than just choosing a play from a list. The 2600 version isn't as well known, but modern critics regard it rather more fondly than similar titles on the platform such as Real Sports Football and Football. So let's go see how it plays today. Let's go play Super Challenge Football.
Okay, welcome back once again to Atari Flashback Classics. Today we're taking a look at Super Challenge Football, and like our previous episode, as I say, I kind of put off recording of this because I didn't want to have to inflict it on my wife because it's a two-player game, but I ended up having to anyway, so recorded this at sort of slightly shorter notice than normal, hence the lack of face cam and that sort of thing. Anyway, enough of that, let's have a look at the manual. Super Challenge Football. Instructions are 2 players only. The object of the game is to outscore your opponent. Who'd have thought it? There's passing, rushing, blocking and touchdowns. Simulated 15-minute quarters. You set both offense and defense. Individual control of both the quarterback and linebacker. Okay, the game. This is 2-player gridiron action. 1 player controls the home team, the other player controls the visitors. There are 5 men on offense, 4 linemen and the quarterback. There's a 5-man defense, 4 linemen and the linebacker. The team with the flashing ball has possession. The field is a regulation 100 yards. Each quarter begins on the 20-yard line. As a team moves downfield, the field moves too. That means it scrolls, ladies and gentlemen. The score, time left in quarter, and first down markers are displayed during play. During the huddle, you will see downs and the quarter of play. There's passing, rushing, tackling, interceptions, and incompletes. No kicks. No out of bounds. Touchdowns count 7 points. Point after touchdown is automatic, and 2 points for safety. So there are a few bits and pieces of standard American football that are missing. I noticed that the kicks are missing because I've played enough American football games at this point to understand that on your 4th down, the sensible thing to do is just hoof it down the pitch and make life as inconvenient as possible for your opponents. But you can't do that in this, which is a bit of a problem, actually, as you'll probably come to see when we move on to our pre-recorded footage. But anyway, so here's the quite interesting thing about this one. In most other football games that we've seen up until this point on this series, and indeed on most other football games on consoles, what you do is you choose a predefined play, and then everyone does their thing. What you do in this is you actually program the individual players, which I found really interesting because I find it a lot more understandable than the usual approach. So what you do here is if you press a red button by itself when you're on offense, that determines who you are going to pass the ball to. So you need to basically choose one of your players, say I'm going to pass to that person, and then pushing the other directions does various different moves. So if you push up, the person will move up. If you push towards the other team, the offensive player will pretend to be a receiver. There'll be a decoy receiver. If you push down, they'll block downwards. And if you push towards the quarterback, the player will block straight ahead. So try and get in the way of the opposing team. And likewise, the defensive team, again, you push a different direction for each player to determine what they're going to do. And that makes a lot more sense. I'm still not 100% sure on the most effective way to use those strategies, of course, because obviously a lot of it depends on anticipating what your opponent is going to do. But I kind of like that. I kind of like this. I kind of like this a lot more than the pick a play option because I don't understand those play diagrams. I understand it even less, like we have in certain other football games on the Atari 2600 and 5200 that we've seen so far, where you need to have the manual by your side in order to refer to, and that's not always convenient. This makes a bit more sense to me. I'm still not 100% sure I like it, but it is better. Anyway, to hike. After all the offensive and defensive men have been programmed, offense presses the red button to hike the ball. Once the ball is hiked, linemen carry out their programmed patterns. Once the ball is hiked, the two players control the quarterback and linebacker with your joysticks. And when you pass it, you press the red button to pass it, and once the pass is in motion, the joystick controls the receiver. And you go from there. So, actually fairly straightforward. And fairly easy to understand compared to some American football games. But anyway, we'll see how our pre-recorded footage went just now. So I'll hand over to who I would normally call Future Pete, but it's actually Past Pete because we recorded this footage beforehand. So it's all got terribly confusing at some point. So let's just say we will go and watch some pre-recorded footage now of a match between my wife and I. Let's go see how we got on. Okay, here we are with Super Challenge Football for Atari 2600. So, every phase of this game, every down, begins with you programming your 4 linesmen. And the way you do this, as we saw in the manual, is if you're on offense, you press the fire button to designate a receiver for your pass, and you push different directions to determine who is going to go where. Then once you've programmed all of your linesmen, you hike the ball, and then you run. Now, I am yellow and my wife is in the blue, and so neither of us really knowing how to play this game at this point resulted in her capturing the ball from me, intercepting my pass, and getting a touchdown of her own, which was quite impressive. So yeah, neither of us had quite nailed the idea of programming the different people at this point. So you'll see, as you select the different people, they will turn around and they will face the other team when you've programmed them. And your quarterback or your linebacker will move down the line, sort of conferring with them as you go. And that's how a pass works. So I had pressed the fire button on that dude there to make him the pass receiver. And then when I hike the ball, at an appropriate time, I press the fire button to throw the ball at him. And you then take direct control of him and you have to receive the ball. And if you miss, obviously it's an incomplete pass, as I believe the American football terminology has it. And then you repeat. And so you see down at the bottom of the screen, you can see D2 quarter 1. So that's second down, quarter 1. And there's also some pegs at the side of the field that show your current position, which is the white one, and where you need to get to over the course of those 4 downs. So offense is currently at the white peg and they need to get to the blue peg by the time their 4th down is over. So now on the 3rd down, attempting to pass it to the guy at the bottom and failing miserably. And then moving along to try again, but tackled by the blue team. And that was the end of the 4th down. Now, as the manual said, there are no kicks. So on your 4th down, you do not have the option of punting the ball up the field in the hope of making life inconvenient for the other team. Which means that when you swap sides, you can actually end up with quite a significant advantage or disadvantage if you're not careful. Which I feel is slightly against the spirit of how the sport is supposed to work. Or it may just be that the punt strategy is a more recent thing. I don't really know. But every other American football game I've played, on the 4th down, the sort of default strategy has been to punt it up the field. Which makes sense. Which makes a lot of sense from a strategic perspective. I don't know American football that well, but even I know that that is a sensible thing to do on your 4th down if you don't think you're going to make it to the goal line. So, during her bout on offense there, my wife was having a bit of trouble actually making a pass execute. And the reason was that she wasn't pressing the fire button on one of the on one of her linesmen. And what happens then if you don't press the fire button on any of them, you're basically doing a running play, which means that the quarterback is going to hold on to the ball and try and run as far as he can up the pitch. Is it called a pitch in American football? I don't know. Field, whatever. Anyway, Yeah, so ideally for most of your plays, you want to make sure that you press the fire button on one of your linesmen so that you can pass to him. And also, if you push right on the joystick while you're in offense, one or more of your other linesmen will also run forward as if they're going to receive the pass, which can confuse your opponent, which is quite a useful idea. So there, see, the second one down, he had run forwards as a decoy, but unfortunately the actual receiver of the pass, which was the guy at the bottom, he had got caught up with a friend on the blue team. So now at this point, both my wife and I were sort of feeling like we had a reasonable grip on what was going on. My wife is even less familiar with American football than I am, but she was at least sort of getting a feel for how it was supposed to work. How she understood that the flow of the game was supposed to be that you hike the ball to the quarterback and then the quarterback passes the ball to someone else. Under ideal circumstances, you can try and get as far as possible up the pitch. Alternatively, you run round everyone like this and try and get as far as you can. That is also a valid strategy. She was struggling a bit with what the different directions did when you're programming your linesmen, which I also found a little unclear to begin with. It does sort of make sense because up makes them block upwards, down makes them block downwards. Pushing towards your opponent's team sort of rushes your opponent's team or goes for to be a decoy receiver and so on. But yeah, as with most American football games, if you're not familiar with the concept of calling plays, then this can feel a little bit indecipherable. However, what my wife found was that just sort of almost picking stuff at random still made for a game that worked and flowed to a certain extent. She didn't really get that far down the pitch, down the field, but she did have situations like that where she was able to make a bit of progress up the field within the space of a single down. And so I took a bit of time with her to explain how she set the receiver for the pass with the fire button. She did eventually get the hang of it. But then once you get a pass working, so there she did a pass, but she was a little bit confused by the fact that there was no one there to receive it. But of course, what you have to do in this game is you have to manually maneuver the receiver of the pass into position in order to actually collect it. Another thing you may have seen during that play that just unfolded there is that this has a real sports soccer style system where if you run a player off one side of the screen, they will reappear on the other. And so that can be used in very strategic ways. Again, it's presumably designed to simulate the fact that there are more players on the team than there are visible on the screen. But in terms of playing this as a video game, it is something that it is worth getting a feel for that, because you can actually sort of do some quite, particularly when you're playing defense, you can do some quite sneaky maneuvers by doing that if you're paying attention to what's going on. Alright, so by this point I'd kind of got a feel for how passing worked, and also what a reasonable counter to my wife's default move, which was just picking down for all of her defensive players. But yeah, neither of us were making a huge amount of progress up the field. As you can see, we're all sort of hovering around the 40 to 50 yard mark. But it's all about taking things a little bit at a time and seeing how you go. So we are first down. 10 yards to go. Successfully received pass. Running onwards and made it to the next down. So again, first down, 10 yards to go. A successful pass, but not quite far enough. But progress was made. Probably about 5 yards to go from there. About 5.5 maybe. That was failure. Right, hike and pass and receive. And he got slowed down a bit there because he was being blocked by someone else. So you don't tackle sort of the immediate moment that your sprite overlaps with the other one, but you do sort of slow down the other player a little bit first of all before you can tackle them. So you can see all the people in the middle there. Both sides were getting stuck against each other because they were both sort of having that slowing effect on each other, and it was causing them to not be able to move, basically. Oh, my wife making a break for it. Yeah, so by this point, interesting enough, I was not having a horrible time. So some of the previous American football games I've played on Atari 2600 just infuriated me so much by the fact that nothing would happen in them. So if you look back on our attempts to play real sports football on Atari 2600, then I found that game inordinately frustrating because everything I seemed to do against the computer player resulted in 2 seconds of something happening and then back to blowing the whistle, picking a play, trying again, hoping that something useful happened. Whereas in this, although there is a lot still of just 2 seconds of things happening and then going back to picking your plays and so on, it felt a lot more interested and varied. Now, I'm not 100% sure if that was the result of the fact that we were playing it 2-player rather than playing against a computer, but it made me think on this game a lot more fondly than any of the other American football games I've played in this collection so far. Now, I don't know if that is enough to get me playing this again after this recording session, at least partly because playing this again would require finding a suitable opponent to play it against and explaining how the controls work and all that sort of thing, and also finding someone who understands how American football works, which is actually quite a big ask in this country. It's quite a big ask in the UK, because although we do have American football on the television at times, it's still seen as something of a novelty, and it's not a sport that the average person in the street understands. It's not like in America, where if you talk to most people, they understand how American football works. They know the basics of the sport, even if they don't necessarily know how to play it or the strategy behind it. They at least know how the basics of the sport works. Whereas if I was going to introduce this game to someone, I would also, chances are, also have to introduce them to American football and how that works and what you have to do in that and how the rules of the game work. See, there's the wraparound in action. So I ran a player off the right hand side of the screen, reappeared on the left, and was able to tackle the ball carrier on my wife's side. So that is how that can be done effectively. And it's not quite as silly as it is in real sports soccer, which is a shame, because the silliness of that wraparound manoeuvre in real sports soccer is one of the reasons I think on that game so very, very fondly. But in this, it is a useful strategy. It's a useful technique. It's a useful thing to know how to do. Okay, so 4 minutes to go in the first quarter. We only play a 1 quarter of this game, by the way. We don't play the full game because by the time this first quarter was up, we were all getting a bit exhausted with what was going on. But yeah, as time is ticking away, you'll see that the score is still 7-0 in favour of my wife. But I am creeping ever so slowly closer to the goal line. I am creeping that little way forwards by simple virtue of the fact that I kind of got to grips with how the passing worked a little sooner than my wife did, so I was able to complete a fair few more successful passes and use that to be able to score a touchdown. So there we go, onto the 20-yard line. This is what I mean by sort of the punting not being there could potentially be a problem. Because my wife is there starting on the 20-yard line, right in front of our goal line, if I can intercept her pass, I don't have very far to go to score another touchdown. Or indeed, if I can make her waste these 4 downs, I don't have very far to go to score another touchdown. And I believe that's what happened. So here we are on the 3rd down. She's made very little progress towards that 30-yard line. Tackled again onto 4th down. See, what she would want to do here to get out of this situation is kick the ball right up the field. But instead, what happened is she was tackled there, just inside the 15-yard line, which meant that I was very close to the goal line, able to pass that over, sit on the 10-yard line, and then I had very little distance to go in order to score another touchdown. Which is exactly what happened. So there you go, 2 touchdowns in the space of a couple of minutes after a game that had not had many opportunities for scoring up until that point. So you can see how that's a potential problem with the sort of simulation aspect of this game. So the actual gameplay side of things, the video game side of things, I think is probably one of the best on the Atari 2600. But in terms of those few simulation aspects that are lacking, it makes it a bit of a troublesome football game. It makes it a bit of a troublesome American football game because you can't take advantage of some of the established strategies that you can do in pretty much every other take on the sport on various platforms. Which is a shame. But anyway, we're closing in on the end of that first quarter. My wife was starting to lose a bit of enthusiasm by this point, it must be said, but we were getting there. I promised I would go to the shop if she would play to the end of this quarter with me, so she relented. I bought her a meal deal with a tuna crunch sandwich and a packet of sizzling king prawn McCoy's crisps. That's usually enough to keep her happy for a little while. Anyway, 1 minute 16 seconds to go. Just inside the 30-yard line. And I'm struggling not to lose ground with every down at the moment. So I just need to make some good passes. But no, it was intercepted with just a minute to go. Now, it's unlikely that my wife is going to score a touchdown from this distance with just a minute to go. But equally, it probably means that I'm probably not going to score any more points. At this point, I must confess, my wife was starting to dread being on offense. At one point she said, oh no, I had to do the thing again. Simply because she'd had a bit of trouble trying to get the passing to work over the course of the game. Like you see there, she didn't move the receiver into position because she sort of wasn't ready for it to happen. So yeah, she got to a point where she was dreading being on offense because there was more she had to think about than just trying to catch the guy with the ball. 26 seconds to go and it's back with the yellow team. But I think we're too far up the pitch to make any meaningful progress at this point. Go for a bit of a run. It's a good run, but 7 seconds is not going to be enough. And we are closing in on the end of the match. Or the end of the quarter, I should say. And there we are. It is all over. Well, that quarter is all over. But that's where we ended our match anyway. So, hopefully that gives you an idea of how Super Challenge Football for Atari 2600 works. Like I say, probably my favourite American football game on the Atari 2600 so far. Which isn't saying a huge amount. But, yeah, anyway, worth a look if you've got someone to play with. For now, though, I'll just say, as always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again next time.